Eric Adams, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Thank you. It's really good to be here, and I hope that our conversation really help other people empower themselves to take control of their health.
Thank you. And I'm sure that it will. We get some really nice emails coming in telling us how, certain guests have really inspired them to make a change in their life. And it's always wonderful to know that there's listeners out there, because it could be lonely on this side of the microphone sometimes. Before we get into the interview, we would love to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us and the listeners.
Yes, this journey, I think that often we focus on the destiny and not the journey. The universe is going to take care of the destiny. We have no say-so in that. We are supposed to appreciate the journey, and this journey is allowing me to meet wonderful people like you and others. And if you just, be present in the moment, you'll see that it has always been and always will be about the journey. And I'm gratitude of this journey I am on.
Yeah, that makes me feel like taking a big breath, and I encourage everybody else just to take a big breath and be right here in the moment and be grateful for what you have, and know that the places that you're going are going to bring you so much joy. That big breath really helps, especially in the middle of the day.
And it does, and that's why it's called grateful. We should be filled with great feelings and greatness and great things. And that's when you're full with them, you will be grateful. And I'm filled with them, and I'm grateful for that.
We're grateful for you being here today. And we wanted to know how you found the plant-based lifestyle. How did it come to you?
Actually, through my mom indirectly, and through a personal experience directly. Indirectly, I saw my mom, who was diabetic for 15 years, and mom was taking insulin for 7 years. And I saw one day, injecting herself, and she grimaced. I looked at her face; it was very slight, and you would miss it if you didn't really notice all of her facial expressions. And I sat in the driveway of her home that day and said, God, I'm not a doctor, but I want to do something for mom. She has been diabetic all this time and taken 9 medications for blood pressure, heart disease. And it was just really hard to even bear. And, sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for, because the universe will give it to you. It's not going to Google or tweet you, but, trust me, you'll get it. And some months later, while I was out of the country, I felt discomfort in my stomach. I thought it was colon cancer, because I lost a good friend to colon cancer, and the symptoms were similar. And so when I returned to the country, I went to the doctor, and the doctor, after putting me on a sedation to check my stomach and colon, when I came out, he stated that, Eric, that vision loss you have that you can't see right now, and the numbness in your fingers and toes, that's due to diabetes. You have advanced stages of diabetes, and I have to put you on insulin and 3 medications right away. And that started me to just think differently.
And I guess you kind of, not to put words in your mouth, but you started to see the life that your mother had been having for yourself, and that was probably something you didn't want to take part in.
And you're right. For that moment, and I remember sitting there and saying, after probably the 5th doctor that I went to visit to get second opinions, after the 5th doctor, I thought that, well, you knew this was coming. Your mother's diabetic, your sisters and brothers are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. And so this is part of the lineage, it's part of the DNA. And I was really, for a moment, settling into this new life, this new norm of injections, of pills, and just really saying, okay, this is what it is. And that was just a moment that I felt that.
And did you go through the medication and the injections, or did you decide to do something else?
I immediately I went to the computer, and I like to say I did something scientific. I Googled, reversing diabetes. And there were a series of pamphlets that the doctors gave to me, and they all stated living with diabetes. I changed one word. Instead of living with, something just told me to type reversing diabetes, and it took me down a different trajectory. And I was able to come up with some amazing information. I felt as though, what am I reading here? Because this was such a foreign term of disease reversal. You don't even hear that in any of the medical professions. And I noticed that Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Barnard, Dr. Greger, and a few other notable experts, Dr. Ken Williams. And I started reading, and I reached out to Dr. Esselstyn and said, I'm reading this information. I just want to make sure this is not a hoax. And I flew down to see him. And Dr. Esselstyn told me the food that I needed to do. And I was saying, listen, I'm going blind, and this kook is telling me to stop eating, turkey and steak. There's not even a connection. But I had nothing to lose. And so I returned to the city. I never started insulin, but I was taking the metformin and other pills, and for a week. But when I turned to the city, I looked in my cupboards and I realized that all the things he was saying, the processed food, the sugar, the oil, the saturated fat, it was all on the labels. It was right there. And 3 weeks after going whole food, plant-based, my vision came back. And 3 months later, my nerve damage went away. Diabetes went in remission. My cholesterol normalized. My blood pressure normalized. It was just a total reversal in such a short period of time.
It's incredible. And I went through a very similar path, and I found Dr. Esselstyn's work as well. And that helped me go down the plant-based journey that I went through to reverse the beginning stages of heart disease that I had and shrink my tumor. And the interesting thing to me is so many people are told by their doctors to go on their medication, to take the insulin. And then there's very few people like you and I who start Googling it or doing our scientific research, as you put it, and come across the plant-based lifestyle and decide to pivot away from what our doctors might be telling us to do. Where does that come from? How do some people go down that path and some people go down it? I'll never understand. But it's really amazing that you're doing well and you've come to the place that you are right now.
Well, I think part of it is that not only did I see the journey of the plant-based lifestyle, but it just really put me into a different place in our existence and our purpose. And I think that we don't find our purpose because there's so much noise and distractions around us. And it's not that you or I are any better than the everyday person, but we need to just pause for a moment and listen to our souls, our spirits. The answers are there, but we are so distracted. And we, number one, we don't believe, and we have been beaten down by the weight of life. And that every once in a while, you take a moment and just listen to your soul. Your soul is speaking to you. Your soul only knows truth. It only knows truth. It doesn't know anything other than truth. I always say, if you see your wife or your partner that you love, you could deny it as much as you want, but your soul know what you're feeling. And that is how I felt. I heard something that came from this pure natural place of no, not living with reversal. And it came clear to me, as though I was speaking from a real deep place. And, so those doctors that felt it was about my DNA, I always say it wasn't my DNA, it was my dinner. And, that's why my mom was diabetic and my brothers and sisters were going through the same thing. And mom joined me. She went plant-based. And as I stated, after 7 years on insulin, 15 years diabetic, that original journey of watching her inject herself, in 2 months, mom was able to cycle off her medicine after all those years of medicine.
That's incredible. And it just goes to show you the awareness that people need to find makes such a big difference. And the power that the food we consume is so huge. There's so much power behind the food helping us get better or keeping us sick or getting us sick. And people need to realize and become aware to that a lot more.
And so often I'll have a new client come in and I'll say, why are you here? And they'll say, well, my intuition has been telling me for a while that I shouldn't be eating meat, that I don't react well to meat, that it doesn't make me feel good. And it took them so long to get there. And it's just such a great celebration that people are listening to their body and they're listening to those small little words. And it's not just follow the norm, but it's follow the intuition. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference. So in terms of your life experience and what you've been able to do, tell us a little bit about how you're helping the people of Brooklyn, and how are you using your position to help bring health to others?
And it's so interesting because I keep referring back to my mom. My mom told me when I was a child that you were going to find yourself in a dark place from time to time in life. And you must make the decision if you're going to turn that into a burial or a planting. And every planting, you should produce the fruits of your harvest so that other people can benefit from it. And so being told that, you're going to lose your sight, you're going to have nerve damage and potentially have amputations, that's a dark place. And, to make the decision, I heard her in my head that, is this a burial or a planting? And so once that planting produced fruits, I wanted to go out and spread and allow other people to find their moments. And so we're doing a number of things. We're really excited about them. Number one, we're targeting our schools. We were able to get the city to move in a direction to have meatless Mondays in our schools, to start introducing children to healthy food. We were successful in getting schools to stop purchasing in the city of New York processed meat. We have a great program at Bellevue Hospital, one of the first of its kind in New York, if not America, where we're doing lifestyle medicine, where people are actually cycling off their medicine, reversing their conditions. We have about 200 people in the program, 750 people signed up for it. And we're looking at our correctional facilities, our hospitals, all the places where government feed people. We want them to do it in a healthy way.
Did you get a lot of pushback at first? What was that journey like?
Challenging, because I think one of the greatest tragedies of a Shakespearean proportion is what we do to medical professionals every day. They grow up as children practicing with their little brothers and sisters or on their pets, hoping one day they can go and experience what the joy of wellness brings, just to get into a profession that trained them to deal with symptoms and not underlying causes. I think our physicians are going through vicarious trauma and PTSD to see people go down this path of no recovery. When you start taking the metformin, you're going to eventually take insulin. You're going to eventually go to amputation and go to vision loss. It has to impact on physicians. And so one of the biggest pushbacks we receive is from the established medical profession, the meat and dairy industries, who put really profit over public health. And it was imperative just to lean into those lack of understanding. And we were just consistent about saying this message is going to get out. We have to start following the science and not start, staying to the tradition of what we were doing that was wrong.
For any other public figure or political figure, I should say, that's listening to this show, because I'm sure there's a ton of them that listen, but what would you recommend to them? How would they get started if they wanted to make an impact on their local community the way you've been able to do that in the Brooklyn borough?
Build coalitions from family members and allow them to, number one, become knowledgeable, and number two, to have a ground up movement and not a top down movement. Because if we attempt to dictate to people, they're going to automatically put their defenses up. But if we come from a place of making that connection, what we have been successful in doing, of saying, your child's diabetes, here's why it's happening. Your child's asthma, here's why it's happening. The obesity. So we were really sensitive about showing people on the ground. Here's the correlation and connection to what is causing your child to miss days at school, what is causing your child to even have behavioral issues. There's a new discipline in psychiatry that talks about nutritional psychiatry and the connection between the foods we eat and bipolar, anxiety, mental health illnesses. And there's a way of really addressing some of these issues. Now, of course, there's people who still may need some form of pharmaceutical help, but foods play a role. Not only does it play a role on not clogging your arteries, it play a role in not clogging your brain. And we need to start to really be honest about what food is doing. And so what I say to my electors all over the country is start from a place of real digestible information. And that was what my book, Healthy at Last, was about. Because we don't want to talk over the heads of people. We need to meet people where they are and take them where they ought to be. So food should look good. It should be good for you. But darn it should taste good. And we're showing people how healthy food tastes good.
It does taste good. And you do sometimes need to get over that little hump of your taste buds changing, getting rid of those layers of salt and oil that have just been sitting there for years. And I make this new dish. We make it like twice a week now. And every time I make it, we look at each other, we go, oh, it's so good.
So
and it's lentils and squash and carrots and onions and garlic and a little bit of veggie broth. Like that's all it is. And it just every time it's so good. Mm-hmm. We want to congratulate you on that work that you've done to be able to, change what's going on in schools, change what's going on in hospitals. God knows I've been trying to change my kids' school for so long, and the pushback I get there. So that's huge. And congratulations also on your book, Healthy at Last. I wanted to touch on one of the chapters where you talk about the real origins of soul food and how Black American culture relies heavily on fried foods as a way to celebrate and to remember history and to be together and have community. And along with those fried foods come pounds, and along with pounds come diabetes and heart disease and all of these other diseases that we've been talking about. So how can we change that food and without really changing the culture and without making people feel like they don't have that celebration and that history? How can we make that change?
That is a great question. First, we have to respect the power of food and what food means to people. It's more than something that you place in your mouth. It is really how we define ourselves. In various cultures, if you walk into their homes and refuse to eat, they take it as an insult. And food is a way that we show love, that we show kindness. I mean, what is more American than when a neighbor moves on your block, you bring them a sugar-filled chocolate cake with all that oil and fat, So we need to really redefine love is, go to the origin, have young people engage in the origin of food and its connection, and really attach it to movements. Because when you do that, particularly now as everyone is embracing the Black Lives Matter movement, and then we need to attach it. If Black lives really matter, then it's more than George Floyd. It is the hospitals that are butchering our families every day. And it is the meat and dairy industry that have really hijacked our homes. And so it's about using this moment. This is a teaching moment for all of us. But it's also showing how you could have the culturally norm of the meals you eat and still hold on to your rich paths. You can still have tacos if you enjoyed the tacos from a South American or Latin American dish. Instead of using fat-filled ground beef, you can use lentils and beans, and you can still have that whole soul food. What is fascinating is how I would cook a meal for my family, and after they eat it and they talk about how great it is and how tasteful it is, then all of a sudden I tell them, oh, by the way, that's plant-based. It blows their mind. If I would have told them it was plant-based before I gave it to them.
Now they must know better.
And so I think it's imperative. That's why that chapter is important, because we took the food that came from the plantation, as any country that has been colonized have taken the food from the colonizer and actually infuse it into their culture. And it's not their culture. Their culture is eating from the land, healthy food, not fast food, not the scraps from the colonizers or the enslavers' table. And we need to redefine our connections with soul food and see what it really is in all of our cultures that have gone through the European colonization periods, need to recapture their past and the foods that they eat.
Yeah, and I'm thinking now about people going back to their communities and changing that ground beef for lentils, or making the mac and cheese with cashew sauce instead of cheese sauce, and slowly, one dish at a time, getting people to fall in love with the dish until people start asking for the recipe, and coming together in a plant-based celebration, and slowly, without this is not a time to be on the soapbox, right? This is a time to approach it very slowly and with a lot of respect, because we know Adam's grandmother made us a lasagna for years, and she would use salsa instead of tomato sauce, and we went and we ate it. We would complain about it later, but we couldn't say no, and we didn't have the heart, because she was putting all her heart and soul into cooking for us when she was growing up. She didn't, going through the Second World War, she didn't have this luxury of grandparents feeding grandkids and all of that. So there's so much more behind our food. So we do need to make sure that we don't insult when we're really trying to make a positive impact.
No, so true. And it's almost a nurturing, approach, and even showing your grandmother, hey, grandma, this is how, let's try it this way, how you taught me how to cook, how you taught me something. I want to also share that love. So it's really coming from a place of kindness and not a place of mean-spiritedness and talking down to people. And the number of people who have reached out to me, emailed me, texted me, called me, read my book, they really appreciate the fact that I am not trying to shake my finger at anyone. I just want to share my journey. And, I'm finding that some people may just sit the book on their countertop, and then one day they come from a doctor with a diagnosis, or they're in the doctor's room and they see and they pick it up and start thumbing through it. The reality is this: if you're eating a standard American diet, you're going to have a standard American disease. And I just want to be there when you have that moment that you could say, do I have an alternative? And if you do, someone may be driving and listening to your podcast. Someone may have passed by and just heard us talking. Somewhere we're going to plant a seed inside them that they have an option. And that is all we are supposed to do. And I think with that, we're going to save lives.
Yeah, and that's a powerful message that hopefully a lot of people will hear, and hopefully we'll get started, because once you start, you feel a world of difference, and your life just becomes a life of awesomeness. Thank you for writing that book, Healthy at Last. That's the title for people listening. If they want to pick it up, we will put a link to it in our show notes. Eric, we appreciate your time, and we appreciate you being here on the Plant Trainers podcast. If people wanted to reach out to you or see more of what you're doing, where would you like them to go to do that?
Healthy at Last BK. Healthy at Last BK. And, all the social media handles and sites, we're there. And if anyone has a great recipe, we love to see that, and you can send it over. We want to build this healthy plant-based community where we just really share our information, our stories, our best practices, and just help people through this moment.
Amazing. Thank you so much for continuing to make an impact on so many lives, and we appreciate you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Take care.